These are elves. They're very simple to make, and yet they're cute, bordering on adorable. And they use up a great many of the scraps that you have been saving for years for just that occasion when you wanted to make something cute and adorable. Ow. All of these elves are made on a bandsaw with a technique called compound cutting. Simply cut a pattern in a block of wood, tape the scraps back to the block to make it rectangular again, turn it 90 degrees, and cut another pattern. And when you remove all the scraps, you will have something that looks vaguely like an elf. And that's cute enough. But with this project, there are some things that you can do to make it progressively cuter and move it more towards the adorable category. First, pick a body shape. I've designed 3 different body shapes: a tall, exceedingly skinny elf, a short, roly-poly elf, and an average run-of-the-mill elf that I refer to as Bob. I'll be using Bob for most of the demos that I'm about to do. You also need to pick a cap. And again, I've designed 3 styles, all with standard elf palms. That's the round thingy at the top. Bob normally wears this S-shaped cap, but he also has a somewhat stiffer and gently curved cap. And when he wants to annoy his parents, he also has this wiggly cap that looks like it's been run over by a sleigh. Plus, the body styles and the caps are interchangeable. You can make any elf with any cap, or you can design your own. Here's Bob with a baseball cap. Did you know that when you take the palm off an elf cap and put it on a baseball cap, it becomes a squatchy? Really? Palm, squatchy. Palm, squatchy. Bead. Who makes these rules? I digress. Once you have decided on the body styles, the caps, the palms, and the squatchies, you need to think about layers. Each of these elves was glued up from several different wood species, and the color of each species designates the part of the elves or its clothing. Boots, pants, belt, shirt, face, cap brim, cap proper, and palm, or squatchy. Of course, the palm really isn't a layer. It's an accessory that you add later, like the nose, the beard, and the pipe. Each of these layers adds horizontal lines to the finished elf, but you can also glue up the layers to add vertical lines and suggest other clothing. Here's Bob with suspenders. His friend Howard seems to be wearing a coat or a vest. And here's another Bob with a vertical row of dowels to create buttons. As you can plainly see, half the fun of this project is designing an elf and giving him a distinct look and personality. But let's get to the woodworking to actually make them. The first step is to glue up a block. Now I've rummaged through my barn full of scraps and I've cut these blocks to make a Bob. You can tell that the grain runs vertically through the completed block. That way all the Bob parts will expand and contract in the same direction. It also means that I'm gluing end grain to end grain. End grain tends to wick up more glue than face grain. And if it wicks up too much, the joint will be starved for glue. This will make Bob's joints weaker than they should be. So I apply glue to both the adjoining surfaces in each joint so there's twice as much glue as normal. Then I wait a few minutes before clamping them up to give the end grains a chance to wick up as much glue as they can. I also let the glue cure for a full day so it's close to full strength. Bob is going to have to suffer through a lot of sawing and sanding, and I want him to hang in there. But once he's feeling strong enough, I scrape away the excess glue, and then I'll cut the brim of the cap. I could do this on a bandsaw, but I find it best to do this part on a table saw. Use a stop to position the block, and cut a shallow slot on all 4 sides. That way the slots will line up perfectly all around the elf. Our double-sided crosscut sled makes a great setup for this. You can also use it to cut the blocks themselves. Use a little spray mount to stick the Bob pattern to the block. Note that I've cut a few notches in the pattern under the brim. This is so I can line up the brim of the cap with the cuts that I just made. Next, drill a hole where you will eventually mount the nose. This should go about halfway through the block. Now it's time for some compound cutting. Bob has some pretty tight curves, so I'm using a 3/16 inch or 5 millimeter blade with a skip tooth grind. That's 4 teeth per inch. This helps clear the sawdust when you're cutting thick stock. Cut the first pattern, the front profile. Take your time and listen to the blade as you cut. If you can hear a vibration, you're feeding the wood too fast. A slow, steady feed will produce a smoother cut, and you'll have less sanding to do later. Save the scraps so that you can tape it back to the block and make it roughly rectangular again. Then we're going to turn the block 90 degrees and apply another pattern to the side. Notice this second pattern is the same as the first, but you don't need to drill another nose hole. Instead, I've marked a 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter slot just under the chin. This bob is going to have a beard. Cut the beard slot first while the block is still rectangular and it's easier to be accurate. Then cut the pattern. This time you can throw away the scraps, or not, depends on your particular level of OCD. And here we have the roughed out bob. Now we have some sanding to do. Ordinarily, it can take a considerable amount of time to get rid of these bandsaw ridges, but I'm going to show you 4 tools that will cut this down considerably. The first is an inexpensive set of drum sanders. These are 2 inches or 50 millimeters long, and they come in 4 different diameters. These will do the entire elf surface except for just under the brim of the cap. For that, I use a small, flat, double cut file. The double cut creates a crosshatch or rasp pattern that works well in wood because it doesn't load up with impacted sawdust as easily as a single cut. And if it does, you just clean it with a file card. I also ground away the teeth on one edge to create a safe edge. That way I can put this right up against the brim of Bob's hat and smooth his face without cutting the brim, or the other way around. You might also use a small strip sander, but I would suggest you get 220 grit belts because these can be very aggressive. This works especially well on the convex curves on the elf, and if you're very careful, you can get right up against the brim of the hat. Or use a handheld rotary tool with a small drum sander attachment. These are great for tight concave curves and details. These rotary tools are really good if you plan to do these wiggly hats. These little drum sanders are just a little bit too big to get into the tight curves. Okay, with Bob all sanded and looking spiffy, let's take care of his beard. I plan to give him a really long beard, way down past his knees, if he had any knees. I've cut this beard from 1/8 inch or 3 millimeters thick plywood, only because I had some in my scrap bin. Just as easily, I could have ripped thin stock on the table saw or resawn it on the bandsaw. But with this little curl here at the end, plywood is a little stronger. I'll sand this beard down until it's a slip fit in the slot. Now, alternatively, I could have opened up the slot a little with the file. I'll also cut a notch in the top edge and sand a bevel so that the beard fits around the face and butts up against the brim of the cap, hiding the top edge of the slot. With the beard in place, you may have to re-drill the nose hole so you can mount the nose. The nose will effectively pin the beard in the slot. I'm not going to do that, however. I'm just going to put a little glue around the rim of the nose hole and then press a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter wood bead partway in. I also think that Bob needs a pipe, which I've made from 2 dowels, 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch or 6 millimeters and 3 millimeters. I'll drill an angled hole where I think Bob's mouth should be. And this time, it's the pipe that will peg Bob's beard in place. And now for the palm, or squatchy, just because it's fun to say. We have to drill a small hole in a small wooden ball, which might be a nightmare if it weren't for a simple jig that Travis invented, just 2 small boards. One board has a stopped hole to hold the bead and a smaller hole to guide the drill. The other board has a hole that's slightly smaller than the bead itself. Rest the bead in this slightly smaller hole and put the other board over it so the bead is captured in the stopped hole. Press down to clamp the bead in place and drill the hole. A piece of tape acts as a depth gauge so you don't go all the way through the bead. Viola, one very small bead with a very small hole. We'll just put a little glue in that hole. There we go. and stick the bead to the point of the cap where it magically becomes a palm. When the glue cures, give Bob a coat or two of penetrating finish such as Danish oil or tongue oil. If you're wondering how to make a sitting elf or a Santa, the procedure is exactly the same with a few small exceptions. First of all, you have two different patterns, one for the front and another for the sides. Consequently, you'll need to glue up a larger block. If you're wondering, the red layers in this block are Paduke. If you cut the brim of the cap on a table saw, you can only cut 3 sides. You'll have to cut the 4th on a bandsaw. And don't try to drill the nose hole before you cut the profile. You'll find it best to drill that hole by hand after Santa is beginning to look a little more like himself. And that's it. The plans and full-size templates for Bob and all his friends are available from the Workshop Companion General Store. You can also find plans and templates for the sleigh, the nesting Christmas tree, and the reindeer. And if you'd like to purchase some of the tools and materials that you've seen, including the wooden bead squatchy palm thing, just go to our Amazon affiliate store. Your purchases are much appreciated. They help to keep Santa's workshop and his video studio humming. And, as always, thank you for your kind attention. Ho, ho, ho.